But from where? While governments are drowning in debt, multinational corporations have never been richer. Indeed, most of them have mastered the art of avoiding taxes through elaborate tax arrangements. With multinational corporations now richer than many countries, civil society is organizing an opposition movement. At the helm of this combat, we find leading international experts, knights of tax justice, who are fighting these unfair practices of tax optimization. Economists, lawyers, and former elected officials. They embody a new hope. They have already managed to defeat some of the incredible tax privileges multinationals enjoy today. A first victory in the latest series of wars as old as civilization, tax wars. In just a few decades, multinationals have taken control of the global economy. They have frequently built their power by using tax havens and depriving governments of precious tax revenue. A wind of revolt is sweeping the planet. Nothing can justify the all-powerful multinationals and the way they manipulate their accounting. Like Star Wars, the story we're going to tell you is about justice, about a group of knights fighting the dark forces of globalization. They have founded an independent commission for the reform of international corporate taxation with the acronym IPRICT. This Commission for Fiscal Justice brings together leading economists like Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, Thomas Piketty, the author of the worldwide bestseller Capital in the 21st Century, and Jayati Ghosh, specialist on development issues. Their goal is quite clear: to get multinationals to pay their taxes like everyone else.
Governments all over the world are in desperate need for funds, and the increase in corporate profits tells you where the money is. The money is in the pocket of the large corporations, the multinationals.
On a un système qui est devenu profondément biaisé au bénéfice des multinationales, ce qui est catastrophique pour notre contrat social.
Just like a citizen assumes that he or she has to pay tax, corporations, big multinationals also have to assume that they have to pay tax.
With multinationals accounting for half the world's commerce, how is it possible that they hardly pay any income tax? The first stop on our journey in the galaxy of tax evasion takes us to Belcourt, France. Eva Joly is one of the founding members of the Commission. Born in Norway, but most of her professional life has been spent in France. A former magistrate and a former member of the European Parliament, today she is a lawyer. She has made the fight against tax evasion her priority.
Là, je suis en route pour Belfort. Ça concerne la façon dont les multinationales minimisent leurs bases imposables depuis des décennies dans le monde. Il s'agit de l'ancienne entreprise Alstom, qui a été très importante en France. Le TGV dans lequel nous sommes est une production d'Alstom. Mais c'est aussi des turbines qui sont importantes dans les centrales d'énergie nucléaire. Et cette technologie de pointe française a été cédée dans des conditions très discutables à General Electric en 2014.
Since Alstom Energy was taken over by the American company General Electric, profits have evaporated. The company's union representatives contacted Eva Joly. Together, they are accusing General Electric of committing tax evasion, causing economic harm to its employees.
Jusqu'à 2015, nous avions des centaines de millions de bénéfices et les salariés touchaient une prime de participation qui pouvait représenter 1 à 2 mois de salaire. Avec l'évasion fiscale et le déficit artificiel, c'est une élément de génération que les salariés ne touchent plus. Donc ça a un impact direct dans le pouvoir d'achat des salariés.
Union representatives discovered that General Electric had transferred Alstom Energy's profits outside of France to several tax havens. It's classic practice used by all multinationals. First, products marketing was relocated to Switzerland. As a result, all of the profits made in France are now booked in Switzerland. How? Thanks to a tax optimization technique called transfer pricing. Let's take a turbine replacement part made in Belfort with a production cost of 100 euros. Before it was relocated to Switzerland, the Belfort site sold this part to its end customer for 400 euros, thus making a profit of 300 euros. Now, Belfort sells the same spare part to its Swiss General Electric subsidiary for 110 euros, which then sells it to its end customer for 400 euros. As a result, the Belfort factory only makes 10 euros, whereas General Electric posted a profit of 290 euros in Switzerland. The same factory made the same spare part, but now nearly all of the profits are located in Switzerland, where they are virtually untaxed.
Et donc, tous les profits sont localisés en Suisse, alors qu'il n'y a aucune substance économique en Suisse. Il n'y a pas d'usine, il n'y a pas d'ouvriers, il n'y a personne qui travaille sur le sujet.
The second trick revealed by the union moved the Belfort factory patents to Switzerland. Now, each time the Belfort plant produces a turbine, it must pay a royalty to the entity holding the patents in Switzerland. And finally, their third trick. Belfort must now pay for the right to use the General Electric brand that is registered in the tiny state of Delaware, a tax haven inside the United States.
Il est maintenant temps de dire stop à tout ça. Donc, face à l'immobilisme de Bercy contre la lutte pour l'évasion fiscale, les syndicats ont choisi de saisir la justice pour faire respecter des règles.
On voit qu'en réalité, le groupe a un déficit complètement artificiel. Le plus choquant, c'est qu'on fait payer des redevances à Belfort pour des brevets qui sont tombés dans le domaine public. C'est n'importe quoi. Si on ne truquait pas les comptes, Belfort est à l'équilibre.
A complaint for money laundering and tax fraud has been filed, and General Electric's Belfort site was searched by France's financial prosecutor. Unfortunately, General Electric is not an isolated case. All major companies use this type of practice.
Look, in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair.
No country is spared. Globally, the revenue loss is colossal. Nearly $600 billion per year, according to the International Monetary Fund.
On a reconstitué une sorte de système fiscal privilégié, enfin fait de privilèges, qui n'est pas sans rappeler les privilèges fiscaux qui pouvaient exister dans l'Ancien Régime, en France ou dans d'autres pays européens à la fin du XVIIIe siècle. Vous aviez, en gros, c'était l'aristocratie clergé qui échappaient légalement à l'impôt.
Thomas Piketty is French and a professor at the Paris School of Economics. A specialist in income and wealth inequalities, his work has inspired a whole generation of economists.
Donc on est censé être dans un monde très différent, mais de facto, on a un système fiscal où ces acteurs économiques les plus puissants parviennent à échapper à l'impôt de droit commun, ce qui est évidemment catastrophique pour notre contrat social en général.
Basically, this is a big con globally and nationally. But if enough people realize it's a con, only then can you change it.
Jayati Ghosh is Indian. She teaches economics in India and the United States. The UN regularly consults her on tax issues.
And at the moment, because it's made so technocratic and in such a jargonistic and complicated fashion, people basically say, oh, we don't understand it. We can't deal with it. And so we leave it to the experts.
In order to understand, we need to go back in time to the beginning of the 20th century and the origins of the world's tax system.
The current multinational corporate tax system was built almost 100 years ago. Capitalists would build things in that country, the workforce from that country, and then they would sell things into that market, or they put them on boats and move them somewhere else.
American automaker Ford produced its Model Ts on the assembly line and exported its auto parts by boat. The cars were then assembled in Europe. The globalization of the economy was taking its first steps, just like multinational companies. They were essentially American or European companies, and they complained that their foreign profits were being taxed multiple times.
Taxer les multinationales, c'est une question compliquée. Est-ce qu'on taxe dans le pays du siège social? Est-ce qu'on taxe dans le pays de consommation, là où les consommateurs sont situés? Est-ce qu'on taxe dans le pays où la production a lieu?
Gabriel Zuckman is French. He is the director of the European Tax Observatory, whose work has revealed the extent of multinationals' tax evasion.
Dans les années 20, la Société des Nations, qui est l'ancêtre de l'ONU, commissionne 4 économistes pour qu'ils écrivent un rapport sur quelle est la meilleure façon de taxer les sociétés multinationales pour éviter les risques de double taxation.
In Geneva, at the League of Nations headquarters, envoys from the world's richest countries agreed to create the first international tax system. In 1928, treaties were signed which gave the subsidiaries of multinationals an autonomous tax status, considering them independent from their parent company. For multinationals, this is the beginning of a tax jackpot. They can now manipulate their accounting to declare their profits wherever they please. In other words, where there is little or no taxation.
On a réussi à éviter ces doubles impositions, ces triples impositions. On a tellement bien réussi qu'en fait, dans beaucoup de cas, aujourd'hui, il y a plutôt une non-imposition, imposition zéro, parce que ce que les multinationales ont fait, c'est qu'elles ont délocalisé de façon artificielle leurs bénéfices dans des territoires où la fiscalité est faible ou nulle.
In the aftermath of World War II, taxes rose sharply. The few multinationals of the time had even more incentive to offshore their profits. In the United States, tax rates were over 50% for companies and even higher for the wealthiest individuals.
Aux États-Unis, en moyenne, de 1930 à 1980, le taux supérieur de l'impôt sur le revenu appliqué sur les plus revenus a atteint 81%. Non seulement ça n'a pas tué le capitalisme états-unien, on s'en serait rendu compte, mais c'était même la période de prospérité maximale aux États-Unis. Pourquoi? Parce que en fait, la clé de la prospérité, c'est d'abord l'éducation. En l'occurrence, les États-Unis avaient une avance éducative considérable, 80-90% de la classe d'âge qui allait dans l'enseignement secondaire long dès les années 50. À un moment, on était à 20-30% en France, en Allemagne, au Japon. Et donc, cette très forte progressivité fiscale observée au milieu du XXe siècle, non seulement elle n'a pas tué la croissance, mais au contraire, elle a accompagné ce processus de construction de l'État social qui demande de la justice fiscale.
The election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 radically changed the post-war fiscal and social pact.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
According to the American president, they needed to reduce government spending and cut taxes to boost the economy. It was the start of a global race to the bottom in terms of taxation. Governments competed fiercely to attract business investment. As a result, in 40 years, the average tax rate on profit had been cut in half.
It's a zero-sum game. I lower my taxes, neighbor lowers his taxes. Who's the winner? The corporations. Who's the loser? Ordinary people who have to pay more in their taxes because the corporations aren't paying their fair share.
Joseph Stiglitz is American, a Nobel Prize winner in economics. He is one of the founding members of the Commission. For him, tax competition is the most toxic aspect of globalization.
And of course, if we don't have public money, our society can't function.
Second stop on our trip, Chile. A country that for decades has waged war on taxes. In the 1970s, even before the election of Reagan or Thatcher, a handful of economists convinced dictator Augusto Pinochet to privatize most public services. They were known as the Chicago Boys. They were trained at the University of Chicago by Milton Friedman, whose shock therapy approach is enshrined in the Chilean constitution.
In Chile, we have been the laboratory of neoliberal policies in which everything is privatized, from education to health to social protection.
Magdalena Sepulveda is Chilean. She is a lawyer and was a special UN rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights.
We still have the constitution that it was drafted during the Pinochet regime. So the constitution said that first is the private sector that should provide for education, health, social protection, or water, and only when they cannot do it or they don't want to do it, then the public sectors come in. And this is extremely damaging, as you can imagine. If public services are only
established themselves over the years in what has eventually become Messana Shantytown, a place abandoned by the public authorities.
El país ha crecido, hay un Chile más próspero, pero la prosperidad ha sido acaparada por unas élites y no ha llegado de manera justa a toda la población.
Acá se reparte el agua una vez por semana, también en Chile. Esos tanques que ves ahí, esos son los que se surten de agua con el camión aljibe, y de ahí la misma familia han puesto cañería y ya tienen un poquito de comodidad dentro de la casa. Lo más difícil de vivir en este campamento es el acceso. Nos queda muy retirado del centro, muy retirado de la locomoción. El mismo hecho de tener la tierra es complicado.
Queremos democratizar la política fiscal. Queremos decirle a las personas, si las transnacionales no pagan lo que corresponde, nos afecta en la vida diaria, nos afecta en la forma que vivimos. Crea desigualdad, crea desazón social y crea violación de derechos.
At the end of 2019, an increase of a few cents on a subway ticket inflamed the country. Faced with inequality, Chileans exploded in anger. The richest 1% grabbed 25% of the country's revenue. Given the scale of the demonstrations, the army was sent in.
En octubre del 2019, la población harta de más de 30 años de políticas neoliberales exige el cumplimiento de los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales. Hay una demanda por salud,
una demanda por una mejor educación, por unas mejores pensiones.
In Chile, like elsewhere, government withdrawal has had a devastating impact on public services, destroyed social cohesion, and fueled extremism.
Sans impôt, il n'y a pas de société. La question de l'impôt, c'est vraiment la question sans doute philosophique, démocratique, principale. C'est-à-dire que sans impôt, c'est le chacun pour soi, c'est l'absence de lien social, l'absence de société. Et tous les pays qui ont réussi à se développer, à devenir riches, c'est des pays qui ont réussi à construire des systèmes fiscaux avec des taux de prélèvement obligatoires élevés, avec un niveau, des ambitions élevées en matière de redistribution.
The tax wars are a clash between two worldviews. One side claims that taxes put a brake on economic development. The other side, that taxes are the driving force. What is certain is that the number of multinationals increased dramatically by the end of the 1980s, with the globalization of the economy. In 40 years, they've increased a few thousand to over 120,000 today. Actually, no taxes. In 2008, a financial crisis of unprecedented magnitude forced governments to finally wake up. Lurched into the most severe crisis since the crash of 1929.
When the global financial crisis hit, a lot of myths were cracked, and people became very angry, and they started to question the basis on which the global economy was built and in whose interest. And that anger translates into political pressure. David Cameron, who's a right-wing conservative in the UK.
I am a low-tax conservative, but I'm not a communist should pay no tax conservative.
Nicolas Sarkozy in France.
Nous ne voulons plus de paradis fiscaux. Le message est très clair. Nous ne voulons plus.
They were forced for political reasons to begin to talk about the need to raise taxation. And that's how it was kicked off, through a series of quite conservative and right-wing governments feeling political pressure to raise revenues.
Governments turned to the OECD, an organization whose members are the world's richest countries. Pascal Saint-Amand was the director for the Center for Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. For 10 years, he led negotiations against the tax evasion practices of multinationals.
Quand la crise est intervenue, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement du G20, qui sont réunis pour la première fois le 15 novembre 2008, ont dit la taxation des multinationales a besoin d'une réforme. Les règles internationales ont été élaborées dans les années 1920, et donc elles ne sont plus adaptées. Et il a fallu la crise financière internationale pour que l'ensemble des pays se réveillent et disent qu'il faut changer de règles, il faut mettre ça en paradis fiscaux.
Strengthening tax transparency and preventing the most aggressive schemes, the OECD's intentions are noble, but they lack ambition. For several NGOs, the OECD's inaction is unacceptable. They decide to form a group of internationally renowned experts to promote their ideas. Hence, ICRICT, the Independent Global Commission for Fiscal Justice, was formed. It is the beginning of a new hope.
In 2013, we had identified the OECD was setting up this project, which was supposed to reform international corporate taxation.
So the concern, as I recall, was that because it was being developed in the OECD, and the OECD is effectively a club of rich countries, that it would be heavily dominated by the interests of richer countries.
So then a meeting was called because we needed some kind of process to shadow the OECD and develop a critique of the OECD.
And it was a meeting in some of the worst meeting rooms in the city, and there were 15 people in a tiny basement room, 15 sweaty activists in a basement versus the entire G20 and OECD. It didn't seem very equal, so we need to bring in some people who have a global profile to help develop the ideas, alternative ideas.
for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation was born. Currently, Joseph Stiglitz and Jayati Ghosh are its co-chairs.
My dream is that multinational corporations would not be in a position to dictate to governments about what they do, how they do it, and what damage they can do to economies.
My dream is actually very simple, that every corporation pay its fair share of its taxes. Some basic principles of social justice.
Ideas are weapons, and the Commission has plenty. For them, there is no point in reforming a failing system. They propose to revolutionize it. Rather than trying in vain to tax multinationals in each individual country, why not tax their total worldwide profits as a whole? This is called unitary taxation.
The idea is actually very simple, the idea of unitary taxation. Basically, a multinational behaves like it's one company. It doesn't say, oh, I am Google India and I'm completely different from Google Netherlands or Google Ireland. It behaves as Google. So we should actually tax them as one company. Facebook, for example. It's getting, I think, 25% of revenues in India, but 2% of profits. So we say, well, wait a minute, you're getting this much revenue, you're employing so many people, we are going to charge you this much of your global profits.
Since its creation in 2015, the Commission has been fighting to implement unitary taxation on a global scale. Despite resistance from multinationals, they must convince world leaders that a fiscal reform is needed. But first, they must mobilize citizens. The next stop on our trip in the universe of tax evasion is India, an attractive country for multinationals. Digital giants like Apple earn astronomical profits. Unsurprisingly, they pay almost no tax there. Jayati Ghosh is travelling across the country to expose the devastating effects of tax evasion and share the ideas with the Commission.
Some of us definitely feel the need that it's very important to bring economics to ordinary people, that economic policies are too important to be left just to policymakers or those who are seen as technocrats. Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here. We have to create a situation where the government cannot respond only to cronies and to big corporations. It has to respond to the people, to the demands of the young, to the demands of ordinary people, to the demands of youth who insist that they have a right to employment. The government doesn't have the political will. We have to force it to have that political will. Thank you. Governments don't sort of turn good just because they suddenly, see the light and decide to be nice. Governments do good things when they're forced to do good things, when public pressure makes them change. Profit shifting, it's obviously very strong in many different sectors, but it's really strong in digital companies. Because digital companies can provide services without even having a physical presence. You don't even need to have an office there. You can provide a streaming service, you can provide software, you can provide other kinds of entertainment, all digitally. And so, who is going to tax you? There's a very, very simple solution. Amazon, Google, any multinational, they behave like one company. Treat them like one company. This is something that is so simple and easy, and it will make such a massive and fundamental difference to all the tax revenues that are leaked out.
The Indian government spends barely 2% of its GDP on healthcare, which is one of the lowest budgets in the world. Those who can't afford the private sector often have to wait in line for days just to see a regular doctor. The consequences of this two-tier system are tragic. The latency of an untouchable is 15 years shorter than higher castes.
Inequality is bad everywhere, and inequality creates unpleasant societies and injustice and all of that everywhere. But one of the problems that developing countries face is that the poor are really poor, and that's terrible because you have minimum things that you need for survival, and the slightest increase in insecurity or the slightest change in your employment conditions is the difference between living and dying.
When the Commission for Fiscal Justice was established, the hope of ambitious international tax reform remained a distant prospect. But in the decade from 2010, a growing number of scandals was about to shake up governments. The first scandal occurred with LuxLeaks. Journalists revealed that over 340 multinational corporations had made secret deals with Luxembourg to drastically reduce their taxes.
People were seeing that their politicians and their rich business friends were making enormous profits and not paying their fair share on that. And so the LuxLeaks and the Panama Papers created a public awareness about what wasn't happening, about who wasn't paying their fair share.
LuxLeaks, Offshore Leaks, Swiss Leaks, the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers. These revelations were the turning point because they confirmed that tax evasion was massive. In the spring of 2019, the hope of a reform of the taxation of multinationals materializes for the first time. In Strasbourg, the members of the European Parliament prepared to vote on an ambitious report on tax evasion.
C'est un très bon rapport qui reprend aussi les acquis de LuxLeaks et Panama Papers. Pour la première fois, nous critiquons les États membres de l'Union qui ne jouent pas le jeu et qui ont une politique de défiscalisation agressive.
The text calls for the implementation of the unitary taxation of multinationals within the European Union. It reflects the willingness of the Parliament to end the status quo.
Colleagues, we will now proceed with the report on financial crimes, tax evasion and tax avoidance.
Tax evasion and avoidance, it costs about 1 trillion euro a year. It means 2,000 euro per citizen, European citizen per year.
The text passed by a large majority. This could be a blow to European tax havens like Luxembourg and Ireland, already in the crosshairs of Competition Commissioner Margrethe Vestager. In 2016, she targeted Apple's practices in Ireland. The Commissioner argued that the exorbitant tax benefits which the company received in effect constituted state aid from the Irish government and were therefore in violation of competition rules.
The European Commission has today adopted a decision that Apple's tax benefits in Ireland are illegal. They allocated the profit between the Irish branch and the company's so-called head office. The head office was subject to no tax in Ireland or elsewhere, because this so-called head office only existed on paper. This was possible under Irish law, which until 2013 allowed for so-called stateless companies.
A company without a tax address that earns profits everywhere but doesn't pay taxes anywhere. Multinationals dreamed of it. Ireland did it. Seeing the enormous potential of phantom structures, Apple created several subsidiaries based on this model. ASI, AOE, and AOI are registered in both Ireland and Bermuda, a place in the middle of the Atlantic that doesn't exist and where no tax can be collected. Apple files the majority of profits generated outside the USA into the accounts of two phantom companies, ASI and AOE, who then transfer nearly all the worldwide profits to a third company, AOI. This setup enables Apple to pay virtually no taxes outside of the United States. In 2011, AOI's combined profits were taxed at just 0.05%, meaning almost a total tax exemption that shocks Europe and the USA. Flanked by his lieutenants, Apple CEO Tim Cook was summoned to appear before the American Senate's committee.
Can you please state for the record where AOI, ASI, and AOE is a tax residence?
Yes, sir. My understanding is there's not a tax residence for either for any of the 3 subsidiaries that you just named.
Can you understand there's a perception of unfair advantage here, Mr. Cook?
Sir, I see this as a very complex topic. Honestly speaking, I don't see it as being unfair. I'm not an unfair person.
About 70% of the profits worldwide now end up with those 3 Irish corporations in these companies that don't exist anywhere except on the water. And we got to understand what is going on. And what is going on is 3 Apple employees have decided where these profits are going to be taxed or non-taxed. Folks, it's not right.
In Europe, Margrethe Vestager calls for the American giant Apple to pay 13 billion euros for unfair competition.
The 13 billion euros that we asked Apple to pay back to the Irish state was, in our view, the taxes that they had not paid.
But in 2020, Apple and Ireland challenged the decision in the European Court of Justice, who overturned the ruling. For Margrethe Vestager, it was a major disappointment. Eva Joly also experienced a rude awakening. The text on tax evasion voted for by almost 90% of the European Parliament was sidelined, torpedoed by the European Commission chaired by former Luxembourg Prime Minister Jean-Claude Juncker.
C'est avec stupéfaction que j'ai appris